The final level of this whole game is being paid to exist. And this is the realm of Kanye West, Kim Kardashian. Gary V basically has someone with a camera following her 24/7. These people have figured out that people are interested fundamentally in the details of their life. And if they give people access, they can monetize it in a variety of ways. These people are billionaires. They figured out how to get paid to exist. That's where unlimited leverage can be unlocked.
So welcome to the podcast, the Brian Bajan / True Courage podcast, which we may cut the True Courage off. We're figuring it out. You can tell us in the chat. What do you think? Today I've got a new friend. His name is Manian, and we hung out the other day having kava. That was awesome. And really got to know each other over a little bit of kava, relaxing. And Ani was recommended to me by some other people. If you check out Matt Hirsch's interview, link in the description, Matt has worked with Ani. Eli has worked with Ani. I'll be doing an interview with him down the road. And everybody kept saying, you got to meet this guy Ani. This guy Ani is a bit of a wizard, especially with business and CEOs, upgrading your mindset. If you're a businessman, a CEO, somebody that wants to really shift his life at a deep subconscious level and start making more money with apparently minimal marketing without going out there and hustling to create all kinds of social media and still for some reason blow up and succeed, this is the guy to talk to. That's the thing that I found interesting about you. You were saying, I've never done any social media or marketing and the clients just keep showing up. And I thought that was really cool. So
I feel like any energy that is expended outside of just us being our most authentic selves is extraneous and it's not sustainable. So anything we do because it's something we think we have to do it to engineer a certain outcome, it is hard to sustain. Effort is inherently unsustainable. Play is the only sustainable strategy. Authenticity is the only thing that is truly sustainable because it actually does not require energy for us to be authentically ourselves. So what I find is that the best business strategy is the one which allows the founder to be themselves. And one of my fetishes, if I may, is to help people construct an economic engine around their energy. I'll say that again. Construct an economic engine around their energy, a system that allows them to be themselves, and by virtue of being themselves, it transforms that energy into other currencies like money, like time, like love, passion, purpose. And when this happens, when we are able to construct this around a person, they basically get paid to exist. And I think that is the pinnacle of human potential and success and achievement. If we can figure out how to get paid to exist, how to get paid to be ourselves, be paid to follow our curiosity, follow our passions, to learn stuff that we're into, to explore stuff, to just be in this playground as little kids in awe and wonder and just following the breadcrumbs of that, and we get paid to do that, then that's jackpot.
That's a mouthful you just said right there. I feel like we could just go over that for the whole podcast, talk about everything you just said in detail. Getting paid to exist. I was thinking, I don't know, like Warren Buffett popped into my mind, right? He loves to do what he does. He still lives in the same house, same car, but he says he reads like 8 hours a day or whatever, and then just does an investment here and an investment there, doing exactly what he loves. And he's super successful. Then you think of Elon Musk, you think of people like that. That's what they're doing.
Really interesting examples. So Buffett is interesting to me because he makes very, very few decisions. He only makes half a dozen investment decisions every year, but he makes billions of dollars from those 5 or 6 decisions. So his revenue per unit decision is massive, probably the highest in the world. Elon Musk, on the other hand, that's a very different end of the spectrum, where he's sleeping on the factory floor. He's running multiple companies. He's got thousands and thousands of people reporting up to him. He's highly leveraged. He's always on social media. It's a very high output entrepreneurship. I think a lot of people admire him. A lot of people respect what he's achieved. A lot of people think he's a little nuts. I don't think a lot of people will trade his life.
No.
I don't think people will, trade the relationships he has, the relationship with self he has. He seems to me from the outside, and never met the guy, very tortured.
He seems tired a lot.
And tired.
Yeah. I feel like he is moving in the direction of his passions, but he's using a lot of force, like you said, effort. Yeah. I would agree with you on that. Whereas if we take a look at somebody like Richard Branson, he's playing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because force is corrosive. It's dirty fuel. And you can see these people age really rapidly when they're relying on force to create success, to create forward progress and momentum. And it's literally aging them and eating them alive.
Yeah,
and it spits them out on the other side. Branson looks like he's getting younger.
Yeah.
He's ageless.
He starts with windsurfing every morning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's another guy who I really love. His name is Richard Koch. He is one of the people who really popularized the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule.
I love the Pareto principle.
Wakes up, goes on a 4-hour bike ride, comes back, has lunch, does reading. Similar to Buffett, he's primarily an investor now. He has figured out how to value and analyze companies and markets, makes a few decisions every year, is worth billions. And if you look at these people who this is my version of a really successful life, most of their time and energy is going into moving their bodies, taking care of themselves, thinking very deeply, and being so rigorous in arriving at certain decisions that the value of those decisions is absolutely exponential. To me, there are levels of wealth. So at the bottom is the person who is basically being paid for their time. So this is the classic case of unskilled labor. Someone who maybe flips burgers at McDonald's. And this person makes minimum wage because they come in, they're taught what to do in a 20-minute orientation. Take the burger patty, flatten it up, or maybe it's already flattened, flip it, and then put it in a bun and just give it to someone. And that's the lowest level. And at this level, it's very hard to increase wealth dramatically because the main bottleneck that someone is facing is time. Because they're trading time for money, they have to literally expend, a unit of time to earn a unit of money. Some people graduate from this place of being paid for their time to the next level, which is paid for their skill. And this is someone like a graphic designer, a plumber, someone who's acquired a certain skill set, or a photographer. And now this person is basically able to operate at a higher level of leverage. And this person's saying, hey, I have a certain skill that I've acquired, and I can allow you to experience some sort of benefit because of the skill that I have that I'm going to put into use for you. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you money. It's going to make you money. Maybe a copywriter who's saying that you have this skill and I'm going to write a website for you that's going to allow you to get clients. Now this person is able to charge more because they're not being paid for their time. They're being paid for their skill. Yeah. The next level is being paid to manage people. So this is the classic function of organizing resources and labor. And you think of, someone who's basically built a big company. They're basically being compensated for their ability to bring people together, to organize resources. And this is the manager, this is the director, sometimes this is the CEO. And this person's basically saying that I'm going to make all these people work together. So I'm going to be able to make more money relative to the previous levels. But this is still suboptimal, in my opinion, because the next level is being paid to think. This is where real leverage is unlocked. And that is because the biggest leverage point we have as individuals, but also as entrepreneurs, is our mind. Because in our mind, we can conceive of ideas, things, experiences, businesses, products are born in our minds. And then we can take that and we can put it out into the world. So at this level, that's where real, I think, exponential leverage is unlocked. The final level of this whole game is being paid to exist. And this is the realm of, Kanye West and, all these mega celebrities. Kim Kardashian basically has someone with a camera following her 24/7.
Gary
V, right? These people have figured out that people are interested fundamentally in the details of their life. People want to know. People have this morbid, voyeuristic desire to know what's happening in their life. And if they give people access, they can monetize it in a variety of ways. So these people are billionaires and they figured out how to get paid to exist. And that's where unlimited leverage can be unlocked. And I think it's up to each person to figure out how to ascend these levels, because I think that when we can figure out how to just get paid to be ourselves and build a flywheel around that there's an economic engine that's running that allows us to just windsurf like Richard Branson, or, do whatever floats our boat, whatever makes us happy, then joy can be at the center of our existence rather than the pursuit of money, of influence, of fame, or any of the other currencies, which is usually a stepping stone to get to that joy.
And at that level, there's no more efforting.
Exactly.
There's being. Yeah, because if you look at Hawkins levels, right, and anything below the level of courage, you're going to be at least in force or some form of effort. And then when you get up above the level of courage, you're getting into choice, then you're getting into having, and then ultimately you're getting into being. And so what you're saying is at that highest level, you're getting paid to be.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And it sounds great, but what I find is that it's really challenging for most people.
You mean getting there or living there?
Living there.
Okay.
Because it bumps up against all of the stories and all of the patterning that we have, all of the conditioning we have around what we think we deserve and what we think we're allowed to have, and our thermostat setting for goodness. Because it feels on some level too good to be true, and for the nervous system, that lack of familiarity makes it downright dangerous. So what I see people do is sabotage the closer they get. It's almost like there's a rubber band attached to where they feel comfortable that's pulling them back. The further they get outside of that baseline homeostatic state, and the closer they get to their wildest goals, not just in terms of money, but in terms of relationships and love, in terms of peace, like how much peace, stability, security they think they're allowed to feel, in terms of goodness, in terms of just feeling really proud and happy about themselves. And there's a tension that increases the further they get from their baseline. And then that's when all the self-sabotaging behaviors start to kick in. And that happens at the level of the mind. It happens at the level of the nervous system, but it also happens outside, in terms of businesses, relationships, health, something that they do that pulls them back into that place. So the deeper work in stabilizing at being, where we're just living life indexed around joy, being ourselves, being authentic, having a lot of fun, having a level of peace and ease in our bodies and in our experience that's unprecedented. To stabilize there, we have to do this internal restructuring, because we have to shift our baseline. And we have to shift our baseline at every level of our system. The root, which is tier 1, which is our nervous system, it's our animal part. For example, I grew up in a family system that had extreme levels of conflict. So much so that the first time I tried to kill myself, I was 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
My nervous system was very, very, very habituated to conflict. So lack of conflict actually felt dangerous for me. And we can double click and go deeper on that. And then that's just the nervous system. That's our animal part.
Yeah.
Then there is the second tier of our system, which is this ego structure, this sense of self, this psychological system that is the collection of thoughts, emotions, all of these beliefs and stories and patterns. This is the place where the part of us that develops between age like 3 and about 15, 16. And this is housing all of the programs we're running.
Yeah.
And then the last place is, what is my relationship with the world? What is my relationship with the universe? What is my relationship with source, God, the creator, whatever the belief system might be there? Do I feel like I'm wanted in this universe? Do I feel like I'm welcome here? Do I feel like I'm safe here? Or do I feel like this is a hostile place where I have to fight for my survival? Do I feel connected to everything? Or do I feel disconnected? Do I feel individual? Do I feel separate? And these 3 levels of our system need to be completely re-architected to allow someone to stabilize at that level of being. Of course, this is assuming they accrued a level of trauma over the course of their life. They had experiences that they weren't able to process that's still sitting in their system. But all of that material is going to basically yank them back into the uncomfortable but yet familiar suffering.
When they get too successful, you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah. It makes me think of, have you ever read any of Gay Hendricks' work, The Upper Limit Problem?
I've heard of him. I haven't checked out his book.
Yeah, he talks a lot about the upper limit problem, that a lot of people, when they, and so does people like T. Harv Eker, when they rise above what they're used to, of course, the thermostat wants to bring them back down. And we have to learn to allow ourselves to succeed. I remember Carl Wolf, who was my mentor, my main mentor, would say that responsibility equals freedom. And then I said, that didn't quite jive with me. I would sit with it and go, no, I whenever I have a lot of responsibility, I want to dump it. And then I had to add, my ego had to add the word well-managed responsibility. The words equals freedom. Because poorly managed responsibility equals prison is what I was thinking to myself, right? The dark side and the light side of that idea. And once I saw that, I was like, wow, I started looking at all these people that were very successful in flow state with massive amounts of responsibility, like Branson, and really empowering others to manage it, to be part of it. And then I saw the freedom they had in life, windsurfing every morning. Beautiful. And I love everything you're saying, though. It just sounds like such a beautiful overlap to that idea.
There's something I want to just dive into in what you just said, because this is so important. Because everyone, but particularly every entrepreneur I know, is searching for freedom, right? Most people who become entrepreneurs, they become entrepreneurs in search of freedom. They don't want someone to be their boss. They don't want to ask for permission to go on vacation. They don't want to, filter their decisions through someone else's lens. They want to be free. They want to self-author. They want to be the one who, is choosing every aspect of their life. Beautiful. The part that gets very challenging is that relationship between freedom and responsibility. Most entrepreneurs want freedom, but they don't realize that freedom comes from taking on an enormous amount of responsibility. Because as an entrepreneur, they're not only taking responsibility for themselves, often they're taking responsibility for their families, for their community, for their customers, for their team. An entrepreneur has to take on massive levels of responsibility to succeed, to stay even, catch up to people who are, drawing a comfortable paycheck.
Yeah.
And more growth as an entrepreneur is directly proportional to the level of responsibility that they're willing to take.
Yes.
And a lot of my work, a lot of my obsession has been in understanding how human beings develop and evolve. How do we grow up? And this is quintessentially the journey of growing up, because we may look chronologically like we're adults, but emotionally, most people in the world are kids or they're adolescents. They're frozen or stunted at a certain level of development. And if you take the average person who works a job, what they're doing is they're outsourcing their basic needs to their employer. Employers telling them if they're good enough, giving them their paycheck, which feeds them, is telling them, when they can leave, when they can take time off, basically setting boundaries. That is a perfect recreation of the parent-child relationship. Entrepreneurs have to do that for themselves, which means entrepreneurs have to grow up. And they have to grow up psychologically and emotionally in a way that no one really teaches. And the core, if you were to ask me, what does it mean to grow up? We can break that down into some very simple things. Like, one, can I differentiate between my present self and my future self? And can I take on discomfort now to create some sort of benefit for my future self in the future at some point? And can I defer gratification? That's the classic marshmallow test. Can I avoid the instant gratification that I could get right now by maybe, scrolling social media or something? And can I take on that discomfort, delay that gratification? And to me, that is maturity. That is the art of growing up. And the difference between a child and an adult is that a child is basically oriented in the now. The adult is acknowledging that, hey, I have to do some uncomfortable things right now so that my life in the future is easier. And entrepreneurs particularly have to master this. And this is a very challenging internal game. I call this the internal management system. We have to develop this internal management system that can organize stuff, that can take complexity and chaos and all of these moving parts and turn that into systems, and can take on this task of digesting discomfort and complexity so that there is a better future. And I think that is the core reason why Sir Richard Branson has created a life for himself where he is mega wealthy. He is associated with a whole bunch of companies that are all based on his values and what he wants to create in the world. Those companies don't squeeze every last drop of energy out of him to exist. He's basically figured out how to set them up to be autonomous and self-managing and self-running so that he can just be himself, be a kid on Necker Island and windsurf all day.
I'll never forget the Time interview where he was the chairman of the board for Virgin Airlines, and somebody, he told this story where somebody finally pulled him aside. They had been scared to tell him for years to explain the difference between net and gross to him. And I thought that was hilarious. And that talk about somebody's getting paid to be themselves, right? I didn't even know the difference between net and gross, and I'm the chairman of this huge airline. And that really kind of illustrates what you're talking about. Now, I would say that, do you agree that at some point that tension, the tension that comes from delayed gratification for a lot of entrepreneurs, for people like Richard Branson saying, I'm going to delay the gratification of whatever now, the short term, actually eventually becomes more pleasurable? In the beginning, it's painful, but later it starts to become this sense of, by delaying gratification today, I know something beautiful is coming, therefore I feel good now.
Yeah, I think it's totally possible to get addicted to that feeling.
Yeah.
And I think it can get very dangerous because we can get very good at delaying gratification, and then we wake up 20 years later, realize life just blitzed by, and we forgot to live life.
Everything's about balance, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And this is really interesting because it all hinges on the time horizons that we operate in. So what I find is that the people who are the most successful and the most, let's say, well-adjusted, they're having the best time of life, they're operating from the longest time horizons. So you look at Buffett is operating at a decade-long time horizon. So when he makes a decision this year, it's not for, he's not trying to do something to make money today or this week or this month or this quarter or this year. He's looking several years down the line. And he's operating from a much longer time horizon. And the longer our time horizon can be, the easier our experience in the present moment, because we're not tight, basically. We're not constricted. You take that, you compare that with someone who, you know, gets paid today and doesn't know when the next paycheck is going to come from.
Would you also agree that Buffett is also doing things today that he loves, like researching? He just loves to research. He loves to sit with his books, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so the smallest useful unit of time is sort of the day, because a day is very meaningful, because in a day we can set it up to have containers, and these containers can be oriented towards being and doing. And within a day, we can compartmentalize and segment this day, where some part of this day is spent, you know, maybe architecting for the future, delaying gratification, making stuff happen. But later in that day, we can come back into the present moment, and we can spend time with our partners, kids. We can sit by a lake and just stare at the water. We can read a book. We can, you know, play with the dog, and we can really be in that state of being, which is the reason why we're doing the whole thing for. And I think the word that you used is so perfect. It's balance. When we can have one hand in the doing and one hand in the being, one hand in the creating and one hand in the receiving, one hand in the future, one hand in the present, then we can basically be integrated to a greater level and bring our full self to each and everything that we're attempting.
When you think of somebody like David Goggins or Dan Pena, you got to do it, and you motherfucker, get out there, fucking hustle, push. Because you said earlier that entrepreneurs are basically raising themselves. To be an entrepreneur, you have to grow up. And that's true. I think it's a brilliant thing. You know, I want to quote you on that. But then you see these guys like Dan Pena, and you could argue they're growing themselves up. Get up there, fucking do it, motherfucker. That kind of energy, right? What do you think of that kind of energy long term? Or that way of being, or that what is it that because there's something they've got going on.
Yeah.
I'll just say it. I personally think that they're telling people to do this energy that doesn't work for everybody, but works for them because they love the push.
Yeah.
They love the suffering.
Yeah.
They're getting turned on for the suffering. So.
It's, first of all, such an incredible question, and I want to honor that fully, because this is one of the most dangerous things that I'm seeing out there on social media. Social media has made it possible for anyone to amplify their voice and build a platform, and that comes with lots of pros and cons. Have a lot of love and nurture for people like David Goggins and Dan Pena. I just want to give David Goggins a hug. And I'll tell you why. Because that man is under-nurtured. If you think about the message he shares, which is relentless, ruthless discipline, you got to push yourself harder, you got to, you know, almost to a masochistic degree, where nothing's ever good enough, where he's never good enough, he has to do more, he has to do more, he has to do more, he has to push himself past and incur vast amounts of pain. Whose voice is that? That's the voice of a very critical father. That's the voice of the father for whom nothing's ever good enough, whose love is conditional for his son. And that's the voice that's been imprinted in his consciousness that he uses to drive himself. And I see this in entrepreneurs all the time. And the reason why he's so popular is because when people listen to him, they hear the voice of their own father, for whom they had to work extra hard just to be good enough, just to be loved, just to be acknowledged, just to be appreciated, just to be someone. And that reminder is what makes him so popular, because that voice just slides right into a similar shaped hole in their heart, in their mind, in their consciousness, for a parental figure who is never satisfied with them, who needs them to do more, be more, achieve more, just to love them. And I think this is one of the most dangerous things in society right now, because it's not a survival of the fittest. It's the survival of the nurtured
What do you mean by that?
So we're conditioned to think that the evolutionary function is animal that is the fittest, that is the most fierce, that is the most competitive, that can gobble up the most resources is the one who's going to win.
Yes, yes.
But that's actually not true. Actually, in evolution, the survival comes from the ability of an animal to cooperate. And that comes down to empathy, that comes down to nurture, that comes down to love. And we have an epidemic of role models in the world right now who don't love themselves, who borderline hate themselves, for whom nothing they do is good enough. And that voice is getting replicated through the internet leverage machine, and millions and billions of people are getting influenced and programmed to operate the same way. And actually, the best survival strategy in the world, how deep do you want to go?
As deep as you want to go. That's what this channel's about.
Okay, so this is some of the stuff that
I love it, by the way.
Most obsessed with. Thank you. And I appreciate you so much because my favorite thing in life is to have conversations like these.
Same here.
Beautiful. So I'm more than anything a student, and I'm a student of the universe. And I'm just so humbled by how perfect this whole thing is that we live inside of. My whole existence is dedicated to finding out how we as human beings can thrive on every level.
With no effort.
With no effort.
Yeah.
Right? And so what I've figured out is that our ability to experience the most amazing life hinges on our ability to lower entropy in our system. Entropy is basically the tending towards disorder that any system experiences. So if we take a house and we come back to this house 50 years from now, weather, the sun, natural, factors would have worn down this house, and it would be in some level of disrepair. To prevent the house from being worn down, we have to make investments. We got to, give it a new coat of paint on the outside. We got to maybe, buttress up the foundations. 10 years from now, we got to, do some repairs because some wires get broken or whatever. Clearly, I don't know much about construction or houses, but everything is a system. We are a biological system, a psychological system. Businesses are a system, or a relationship or marriage is a system, a family is a system. And so we're basically a bunch of systems inside systems. Every system has a certain amount of entropy inside inherently. So if we let ourselves go, what happens? We get fat and unhealthy, right?
Yeah. You need some level of tension to keep growing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we got to make that investment. So we got to exercise every day. We got to eat clean. We got to pay attention to ourselves. So all of these are ways to reduce entropy. One of the biggest sources of entropy for a human system comes from their relationship to themselves. So one of the reasons why being is so hard for most people, just sit in a room by yourself, no phone, no media, no stimulation, and just enjoy your own company. Madness. That's a nightmare. It's really hard for most people because they cannot even be with themselves, right? Why? Because there's too much entropy. That entropy comes from the relationship someone has with themselves. A manifestation of the relationship that someone has with themselves shows up in their self-talk. So when you talk about David Goggins, when you talk about someone who is whipping themselves into doing better, into being more, into succeeding, into accomplishing, into working out or whatever it might be, that is creating a lot of entropy. And it's very hard for a system with a lot of entropy to succeed. And I say succeed with air quotes because success is very relative. It depends on what, our goal is. But if you take a relationship, a lot of relationship entropy basically looks like a lot of conflict. It also looks like the two people in the relationship not being on the same page, not being aligned on the same values, not having the same vision or mission or where they're trying to go and how they want to live. And over time, this entropy will break the relationship apart, right? So we have to keep making investments. Let's have conversation. Let's talk through stuff. Let's sit with the difficult emotions. Let me hear you. I want you to hear me. This is what I'm feeling. This is when we keep doing that, and when we align, we reduce the entropy, and guess what happens? We have a better feeling relationship. Both people feel more close, more connected, more intimate with each other, with themselves, and the relationship thrives. And it's the same thing with business. It's the same thing with any other system, with our physical system. And in this world, we reward this cutthroat competition. We reward zero-sum games. We reward people who are basically sacrificing every aspect of themselves to achieve something. And I think that incentive structure is extremely dangerous, because actually what we should be rewarding is, hey, are you really in tune with your emotions? Hey, do you actually really love yourself, and you care about yourself, and you take care of yourself? You know, with clean food and water and movement and exercise, but also with the words you speak to yourself. We can apply the love languages back to ourselves. Like, are you speaking these words of appreciation to yourself? Are you doing these acts of service for yourself, right? What is our relationship with ourselves? And because that is the centerpiece of our entire existence. And, you know, we went down this whole rabbit hole from the whole David Goggins thing. But to me, if I was to boil a single measure out of how someone can look at the state of their life and evaluate success, it would be through the lens of entropy. And I find that this works in business, it works in relationships, it works with, you know, how we operate within ourselves. And anything that reduces entropy it feels amazing. That's the direction we want to go. Being in this state of self-love, being in a state of contribution where we're thinking less of ourselves and really thinking about other people and making an impact, that is the lowest entropy state that a human can be in.
It's beautiful. And at the same time, would you also agree that you can't be adverse to entropy?
Completely. It's a fact of the universe.
Yeah.
It's always going to be there.
Because sometimes things have to burn up, like the phoenix,
Yep.
and be reborn. It's required for the next evolution of whatever your experience is.
Entropy is a deflationary aspect of the universe. So basically what I mean by that is, if we didn't age and die, then life would have no value. Because value comes from constraints. Mm-hmm. If we had...
That's why beauty is, what does it Zan say, is that beauty is fleeting, and that's what part of what makes it beautiful.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Like, if we had infinite time to have this conversation, over time, the value of this conversation would plummet and diminish.
Yeah, that's true.
But because we only have a certain amount of time with each other, I have the ability to appreciate the time that we do have together, because it's so limited. And so the limitation, the constraint, actually is what creates value. And so entropy, in a way, is actually what creates value. That's why I say it's deflationary versus inflationary, which is a little economic reference, because we live in a time when governments and these private entities that run central banks are basically printing money at will, which, you know, inflates the supply of money and it decreases the value of money. Entropy, on the other hand, is sort of like cryptocurrency, where it's got a built-in deflationary system, which means the value goes up over time.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and the printing of money, of course, is intentional too. Anybody that can see all this can see their intent. They want to devalue the money, right? And I love this whole idea of entropy. I call. Have you ever seen a TED Talk by Kelly McGonigal called "How to Make Stress Your Friend"?
No.
It's kind of jumping back to an earlier topic, and it's a really good TED Talk.
Yeah.
But she shows in there, and I reference it a lot because I think it was very valuable, is that depending on where you're coming from. Let's say entropy is going to create tension, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but we need tension to grow.
Yeah.
And then we evolve into our next self and the better we are at entropy, the faster we're going to evolve from one level of tension into the next. Ascension seeks resolution. What she really illustrated in there was they took 30,000 people over 8 years. They asked them if they had low, medium, or high stress. And at the end of the 8 years, they noticed that, they also asked them if they thought the stress was good for them or bad for them. Then at the end of the 8 years, they asked them, they looked at them, at their lives and said, do any of these groups stand out? And 2 groups stood out. The group that had high stress and said stress was bad for them had the most deaths, the most illnesses, the most challenges. But the group that thought stress was good for them and had high stress had the most successes, best health. So they took it a step further and they were looking at how these 2 groups related to stress chemically and in the body and hormonally. And they would notice things like the one that liked stress, that thought stress was good for them, they get more blood flow into the heart. They would actually pump literally more blood. The one that thought stress was bad for them would get less blood flow to the heart. The one that thought stress was good for them would get oxytocin, called a love drug, under stress. And so the stress would become this form of healing, because oxytocin also heals the heart. The one that thought stress was bad for them would get cortisol pumped in, and they would actually damage the heart. And so it was very interesting that the same external stressors in the world relate very differently to different people. And so when you think about somebody who has this set of belief systems, entropy is going to be this beautiful process of growth and evolution, whereas other people are going to resist it at all costs. Do you experience this with you? I'm sure you're taking your clients from one stage of this to the next, right?
Totally. And I love this. This is such a beautiful way of illustrating how we perceive things really makes a difference in what happens and what we experience. Because like you said, the external stressor can be the same, but 2 people can experience that very differently because they perceive it very differently. And, people go to the gym and they use stress on their body with tension, with weights, and it makes their body grow. And people also, they basically destroy their body in a variety of ways. And so the stimulus is not the problem. It's the perceptual filters that govern how we relate to the stimulus that makes the difference. And this is particularly interesting to me because I find it really interesting how we end up with the perceptual filters that we have. What is the exact combination of conditioning, of imprinting, of experiences, trauma, all of these things that combine to form the lens with which we interact with the world. Because in what you're saying, the lens is what makes all the difference.
Yes, I would agree 100%. Yeah, I've seen it in my own life, and that sounds like you have too, because you said you had a very rough childhood, right?
Yeah.
And so did I. I didn't have any physical abuse, but I had a sociopathic, career criminal stepfather and a bipolar, borderline mother, screaming and yelling. So the emotional abuse was off the charts, and I was massively depressed. I don't remember ever wanting to commit suicide per se, but I do remember not wanting to be seen, wanting to almost cease to exist, numbing out completely. And that's why I do what I do now. This whole idea that you can enjoy life under massive amounts of tension, where the tension is actually fun and actually grows you and can grow the world, is just exciting to me. It turns me on in a lot of ways.
And being seen.
Yeah, and being seen.
You flip that too.
Yeah. I didn't want to be seen, to being comfortable being seen, to enjoying being seen. Even the negative comments, like, go away, go for it. It's no big deal. How about you? What was your life like? And how because you obviously came to a lot of similar conclusions and some beautiful, beautiful material you're putting out there. So I'm really curious I'm always curious, like what created Richard Branson? What created these people? What was their childhoods like?
Yeah, I grew up in India. We're having a really intense, hard time. It was me, my mom, and my dad in one small room, 10 feet by 10 feet. Right. We moved every 6 months. So I'd moved, 24 times by the time I was, 10, 12 years old. So everything was very unstable. They worked, 5 jobs between the two of them. I would come home when I was 3.5 years old, and be alone for, at least 6-7 hours till my mom came back from work. And I remember being really lonely. No
You
siblings,
have brothers and sisters?
No siblings. And sometimes I'd drink fever medication, which would make me fall asleep and pass out because I felt really lonely. This was convoluted by the fact that I think my folks were under a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of conflict. I felt alone, not just physically, but also emotionally and mentally. And, I felt kind of just lost in, spinning out in a way. And there was so much conflict that I, at a very early age, I think the first time I remember, thinking about and, coming close to attempting to kill myself I was 6 years old. And it felt easier to just pull the plug on the whole thing than, continue to live in this reality where it just didn't feel good. It didn't make sense. I didn't feel attuned to, I didn't feel nurtured. I just didn't get my basic needs met.
Yeah, isolation. Huh?
Yeah, and there was also a lot of, physical, emotional abuse. And I fundamentally just had a really, really hard time being here. And I'm so grateful, particularly, with my dad, who was the main, abuser in this case. I realized after his death, he literally died because he didn't love himself enough. And I watched him engage in all of these behaviors around cigarettes, alcohol, and, other unhealthy habits, which kept him in this cycle of numbing, all of the emotional pain that he clearly had a lot of. And eventually, his liver gave out and he refused to get a transplant and he died.
He wanted to go. He hit the off switch. Yeah.
He wanted to go. He just didn't know it until the very end. And I see that in a lot of people. They're basically killing themselves with these tiny paper cuts each day and not realizing that each mean word that they speak to themselves, each time they drink alcohol to numb the pain, each time they, do something else, it is one more act of violence against themselves. And I realized after he died that I chose him as my father in this life. And I chose him because he didn't have any other way to displace his pain. And I needed to experience vast amounts of pain by being born to him, by having the exact experiences that I had, because that was my curriculum. My curriculum was to hold vast amounts of pain, because otherwise how else would I learn to feel humanity's pain? Because my purpose emerged from that exact set of experiences. And I think this is how our karma shapes our dharma, which is an Eastern, ideology where our karma, this is the stuff that we experience. This is the things we do and the things that are done unto us. And we live in this karmic cycle where we're just repeating this karma. Trauma is passed from generation to generation until someone's brave enough to feel it. We pass these patterns down the generations and we see it repeat in every successive generation until someone decides that, okay, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to actually sit with the pain and I'm going to be with this. I'm going to, invite this darkness to the table and give it a seat, because that is what creates our dharma, our purpose, are the reason why we come alive, the reason for us to show up fully engaged in pursuit of something greater, something that's beyond us. And I think what we experience is the birthplace of who we become. And so I feel so grateful for every bit of pain that I experienced. I feel so profoundly blessed for every bit of violence, for every bit of loneliness, for every bit of shame, all that darkness, because I don't think I'd be who I am without that.
I think you nailed it on the head. I feel the same exact way. I worked really hard at learning to love my mother and let go of everything that ever happened. And I've always said, at a certain point you wake up, it's just like, no, I picked her. I picked her. I wanted to live this life. And I always said, and I always say to people, and I'm kind of curious what you say to people, whether it's true or not doesn't matter, because if you act as if you picked that person, it gives you so much freedom and power. Just whether it doesn't have to make logical sense. It does make logical sense in the sense that if you can get to love for that person, it's the ultimate act of love, right?
I think the act of believing makes it true.
The act of believing the idea.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to throw something into the mix because I love mystical Christianity.
Yeah.
I had a psychedelic experience that revealed something to me and made me go deep into mystical Christianity. And what you're saying is one of the reasons I love Christianity so much. As Jesus is dying on the cross, what is he doing? Loving everybody, even the people that are whipping him, beating him. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Complete, utter love, open-hearted forgiveness under the midst of the most horrible pain. What a amazing teaching.
Yeah.
And then and he's showing you can surrender, and if you completely surrender all your embodied pain and hurt, and it all breaks away, you end up one with consciousness, God again. And I thought that's kind of what you're talking about here. We're not doing it in 2 hours like he did. God, that would be incredible. But
I mean, it's such a beautiful story because, to me, that death represents the death of the ego.
Yes.
Because it's the ego that takes a position against things. It's the ego that withholds love. It's the ego that withholds the empathy and the understanding. It's the ego that wants to be defiant and say, no, this person's cool, but fuck that one. It's the ego that wants to perpetuate this sense of not enoughness, of, not feeling worthy, of not feeling good enough for something or someone. That act of separation is perpetrated by the ego. And so the death that I wish upon every human being is the death of their ego structure. And I don't think the ego is the enemy either. I think it's a paradox. I spent...
Holiday's going to get mad at you. No.
Yeah. I mean, the thing, I spent so much of my life thinking that if I could get rid of my ego, then I'd be free.
Well, you did talk about that over Kava, that period of time you spent where everything pretty much stopped, right?
Yeah. I reached this point through the practice of just loving everything, which, funny enough, began on a New York City subway line, which is, always a colorful cast of characters. And this idea just came to my mind, which was, what if I just fall in love with every person on the subway? And I thought that was a cool idea. So I, began pursuing it with some level of ferocity. And a couple of years later, of doing that, of just making that just a part of my life, where wherever I went, the subway represented, the hardest place to practice that. Because sometimes there'd be a homeless guy who shit himself, and it's if you haven't been in the New York City subway station,
I have.
And the trains, that's a particular concoction of pheromones.
Do you know who Frank Yang is?
I've heard of him.
I'd like to.
The bodybuilder guy.
Yeah, he's become a Buddhist. Says he's enlightened now, and his videos are beautiful.
Yeah.
The way he speaks and teaches, and yeah, he does these. He'll videotape people like on subways and on the streets, and he'll catch them at their most vulnerable moments in these videotapes. You can see it in his videos. He really catches their beauty coming out. Somebody with no teeth, homeless,
Yeah.
you know, and one of the things he said, I laughed when he said it. He says, when you can see the beauty in a piece of shit, you're really beginning to wake up.
That's it.
And he's not talking about the people. He's talking about a literal piece of shit.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to put those two together.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And, you know, as challenging as that might be for someone to digest, no pun intended, it really is that simple.
Yeah.
If we can fall in love with everything in the universe, everything outside us, seemingly outside us, everything inside us, our experience completely changes because the ego cannot survive that, because the primary function of the ego is to create separation. And it's a very useful one. So I reached this place where I was pretty stabilized in this, you know, whatever we want to call it, state. I was swimming in bliss. I was in some sort of non-dual state where I didn't experience much separation between myself and, you know, other people or the world. And it was quite exquisite. It was quite incredible. And this was the place that I, for so long, I thought would be the place to get to. And I hadn't really tried to get there, but I had arrived there nonetheless.
I find the people that don't try to get there are the ones that arrive there.
Yeah, it seemed like you can't really grasp or chase to get here.
Yeah.
Because this is the absence of chasing. It's the absence of grasping. That's the only way to...
Well, we did bring this up, but most of the people that I find that get there the most efficient way possible are the ones that weren't chasing enlightenment. They were, like you did, they were working on just loving everybody. They were working on Eckhart Tolle. It happened unintentionally. Lester Levinson, he was working on loving everybody too. Love everything. And enlightenment was a byproduct of their reality, right?
What would be the opposite of loving yourself? I hated myself.
Yeah.
I couldn't stand myself.
I was looking like, is that a trick question?
It was like, there should be a word for it, you know, but I was on the opposite side of the spectrum. I literally wanted myself gone.
Yeah.
Right? I wanted to extinguish myself. So me falling in love with everything around me wasn't, you know, it almost seemed like my last attempt.
Interesting.
It's like,
this was a rougher period of your life.
Oh,
when
yeah.
you came up with this idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like this is the last ditch. Like, can I just find love wherever I look? Right? And it brought me to this beautiful place, but I realized that was not the destination. That was actually the beginning of the journey. And I realized that being blissed out and being up on a mountain figuratively, I was useless. And that was not the point, because the real game is being a healthy ego structure. The real game is to be a healthy individual, be a healthy person who makes an impact, who makes a contribution, who is able to bring that glimpse, bring that kernel of love and that kernel of oneness and non-duality and connection and beauty and wonder and awe into as many lives as possible, and infuse that in such a way that it activates people and gives them a new model, a new map, a new operating system in terms of how they could be, to construct their life in such a way that their experience is absolutely magical, because that's on offer for all of us.
Yeah, it's waiting for all of us. Yeah.
It's waiting for all of us.
I want to ask you, when you say healthy ego structure, I'm going to put it in a different set of words and tell me if you agree.
Please, yeah.
You have an ego that you're not identified with, that you're unattached to, but it allows you to function in the world.
Yeah.
Versus an ego you're attached to and identified with.
Yeah. And it's very simple. It's one of the things that I've sort of tried to understand very deeply is, what is it like to build a business from an enlightened place, right? How do we balance these different needs that are present when you're an entrepreneur building a business, where you have to generate attention for your stuff, right? So if we take the lens of, completely transcending the ego, there's no desire to grow. There's no need to get people to pay attention. All of that stuff goes away. So it's very hard to actually make progress in terms of a business. But if we're too over-indexed on the other side, or overly identified with the ego, nothing's ever good enough. We reach one revenue milestone and it's like, okay, on to the next. We're, mercilessly driving ourselves. We're always chasing, never arriving, never finding. And, no amount of success really fills the void. And so that doesn't work either. So I think there's this middle point where we're identified enough with this sense of self, with this psychological system that is me or you, where it's functional. It's like I'm able to, given that my primary orientation is to make impact, I can do enough, but it doesn't take me away. It doesn't carry me off where I completely lose sight of
So
what's
is
real.
this ego that you're referring to, as it arises in consciousness, is it a sense of me? Or is it a sense of, is there a sense that it is literally you, so that when you die, that it's dying? Or is there a sense it's something you're wearing, carrying, experiencing?
Yeah, that's a really insightful question, because I think that depends on how much awareness someone has gathered, how much consciousness work they've done. Because at the beginning, it just feels like that's me, that's who I am. The more we sit with ourselves, the more we introspect, the more we try to see it, because it's impossible to actually see it.
Yeah.
The more we realize that it's actually not who we are. It's something that appears in consciousness. We are the space in which it arises. And it is this persistent, continuous sense of being me, right? And it has some utility.
I keep thinking of Srina's regatta.
Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
that. I am
Yeah.
that in the world. I am this. Yeah.
And, when someone has fully integrated this, then they realize the utility, because they see that, there are some advantages to being identified and to know oneself as an ego, being Brian, being you. There's some utility to it. It lets you have a podcast. It lets you host retreats. It lets you do things, and it's convenient for people to interact with you. It's very useful, and you can cultivate these characteristics and these capabilities. And when I meet you in person, the first thing I thought was, oh wow, he's really at ease in his body to an extraordinary level. I really like who he is. I really like how he rests in his body, right? And it's convenient, because now this container of Brian allows me to house a bunch of qualities and characteristics that come up when I interact with you. It's great. And yet, as we're sitting here talking, there is no need for the characters here. We don't need a Brian and an Ani to have this dialogue, to have this interaction. In fact, if Ani appeared right now, it would actually take away from this conversation, because there'd be a sense, oh, how am I being perceived? Am I saying the quote unquote right things? Did I say something that sounds weird or stupid or is not going to be understood well? It only takes away from the experience. That's why, when someone's in a flow state, talking about Branson on his windsurfing kite, whatever, however one windsurfs, at that, what he's searching for, what the peak experience involves the absence of self. In many ways, that's what we're looking for. We're looking to lose ourselves in the moment, whether that's, in the moment with each other as we talk, could be on a date, could be making love, could be eating a really juicy burger. It could be, looking at the Grand Canyon, petting a dog. We're all looking to lose ourselves, because all the most amazing moments that, anyone has and is able to cherish, there isn't a sense of self present in that. And so if we can find this balance of selfing enough that we can be functional, but also not selfing all the other times, because that's primarily, I think, what keeps us from being in that state of being.
It's interesting what you just said there. We want to lose ourselves. So a lot of people are out there trying to get somewhere in the future, $1 million, the perfect hot girlfriend, whatever else they want, right? Perfect six-pack abs and muscles, so they can lose themselves.
Bingo. Yeah, what do you do after the six-pack? Yeah. Oh, I'll go to the beach, and then what do you do? I'll sit in the sand.
Yeah, it's so there's a sense of, if you could master the art of, when you need to, just lose yourself, like turn it off.
Yeah.
And so do you find that you have that ability on a regular basis when you need to turn it, just lose yourself for a bit? You can.
So I actually have the opposite problem. I actually don't self-reference much. Mm-hmm. So I have to effort to self-reference.
Interesting.
So that experience that I was describing, it left me primarily, in that state of oneness and absence of separation. Because the primary function of the ego is to create a sense of me. And when I create a sense of me, it creates a sense of not me. So that's what creates this boundary between duality. Me and not me, duality exactly. My journey has been the other direction, which is, how do I become enough of a self so that I can, function in the world a little bit better, but serve this medicine, which is, a taste of what it's like to be liberated. Because I think this is liberation to a certain extent. I don't think about myself a lot. I'm not worried about how I, come across, and, who's happy with me and who's pissed off with me and how many people follow me on what channel. Those thoughts just don't arise. And yet I have had to self a lot more. A romantic relationship will definitely accelerate that process of selfing, because a relationship requires two selves to come together. And that's been a crucible of sorts. Business has been a crucible, because it's been hard to really create the kind of impact that I want without caring about, how much attention I can generate. So I'm in this season of trying to self in a very intentional way, where it doesn't take over, but it's useful enough that I can, make progress towards the goals that I have.
I like that term. I have to self. That's a beautiful term. So interesting. It's a great way to look at it, because it creates that sense of disidentification, and it's something you put on to get a job done. Yeah.
Versus having it always on.
Yeah.
And
having to take it off.
Having to take it off here and there.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like we're playing a character in a video game.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've said that many times.
Most times we forget that we're playing a character in the video game. So we become so identified with the character in the video game that, the stakes feel really high and everything becomes really intense, until we remember that, so it's just a video game.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. The things we worry about are very strange to me now. I lost a bunch of money in an investment once. It was about $425,000. And I was stressed for about 2 weeks about it, really upset, because I was really attached to money at the time. But I said, I'm going to release this. And at the end of the 2 weeks, this realization hit me. Does this change my life at all? Well, I'm still going to drink the same coffee in the morning. Still going to go the same places. Still going to wear the same clothes. Am I going to be broke in the future? No. I'm still living in the same house. So actually, nothing changes in my life except a number on a screen. And I'm decided to be super stressed about that. And I was like, it's kind of ridiculous. The whole idea of this, life is lived right here.
Yeah.
And this is it. And people just don't see that this is it. There is nothing else really.
Can I share another thing I've been noodling on?
Yeah, please.
You're going to like this. So I came up with this model to explain So the goal for each of us, whether we realize it or not, is a state of total relaxation.
Yeah.
Right? When we're totally relaxed, there isn't that core constriction known as the sense of self. And I'm not worried about myself, in the future, and I'm not obsessing over something the character that is me did in the past. I'm fully present. I'm fully in my body, fully relaxed. My heart is open. I'm connected to spirit, to source, to God. And that's the perfect state of being. Now, most people, and I came up with this at a retreat to explain some of the funny ways we operate, which is that we have a series of nested straitjackets that we wear. So one of the straitjackets that's put upon us long before we could consent to it is the straitjacket of time. Most kids have a memory of being woken up in the morning and being rushed into the shower, being force-fed breakfast, and then rushed out the door to go to school. And in those early experiences, we're given the first straitjacket of time, and then the straitjacket gets tighter and tighter and tighter as we create this relationship with time. And now we're living inside the construct of time. And time becomes a straitjacket that squeezes us tight, that constricts us, that creates tension, that keeps us from that state of full relaxation. Another straitjacket is money, because money becomes a proxy for safety and security. And again, that's installed as a kid. And then we grow up and we, connect the two. And now imaginary numbers in a bank account on a screen can have authority over my state of being. They have authority over my thoughts, my emotions, how I feel. And that's, the straitjacket of money. And you can imagine there's so many other straitjackets that we got put on ourselves long before we could consent. And also some that we've actually as adults put on ourselves where we forget that we're wearing the straitjacket. And so one of the interesting things I like doing is when I work with people is making them aware of all of these straitjackets that are on them and then giving them the choice. Hey, do you like that? You want to keep that one? Or if that doesn't feel good, what would it be like to live outside of that? So one of the things I stopped a few years ago, I stopped using alarm clocks. So I don't wake up my body with an alarm. I know, crazy idea. Mm-hmm. Right? So I don't wake up into alarm. My body wakes up when it wants to. And I've built a business that doesn't require me to wake up at a certain time. And, that's one of the cool things I do with other entrepreneurs. Like, let's build a business that's your personal playground where you just get to be you.
Well, you're supposed to be stressed and burned out and crash at the end of the day.
Right, exactly.
That's what everybody believes.
That's the norm, because that's the price they think they have to pay to earn.
A very successful multimillionaire entrepreneur just said that to me the other day.
Really?
He said, yeah, at the end of the day, you should be ready to pass out if you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And I was like, my thought was no.
And that's the interesting thing, because that person believes it fully, it's going to be true for them.
Yeah.
And if someone else like you is like, I don't think that's true, and I don't think that has to be true, I think there's a better way, there's a different way, that'll be true for you. And that's what allows 8 billion realities and 8 billion universes to exist.
Yeah.
Right? Because each one of us lives inside our own universe. We don't have one shared reality that we're all in. We're all living in our own universe. And then the consensus across those universes is what creates all the consensus mechanisms like money, taxes, nationhood, tribalism, all that stuff.
Yeah. A lot of people spend so much time obsessing over stuff that will never affect their lives. Is the earth flat or round? Well, is that going to really affect their joy in life today?
Yeah.
I've been noticing the flat earthers going nuts lately. They fascinate me. Time to me is one of the big ones. That straitjacket is, in my opinion, the key straitjacket, as you put it, that needs to come off.
Yeah.
For people to really go free. Gay Hendricks talks a lot about it in a chapter in his book, The Upper Limit Problem. He calls it Einstein time. Mm. And then Mark Allen, you know who Mark Allen is?
No.
Publisher of Eckhart Tolle, owns New World Library.
Cool.
He was the original publisher of Eckhart Tolle, and he speaks like Eckhart real slow. And he was a Zen Buddhist monk till like 30 or something like that. And he said, I came out of the monastery kind of like, I want to build a business, but I have no idea anything. I don't know how to do anything but meditate. And so he said, I just got some little papers together, wrote some stuff, stapled them, and sold them for like $0.25 each or $1 each. And he said, I didn't have money to buy lattes, so I was trying to figure out how to buy. He ended up building this big publishing company that publishes spiritual authors. But he said his whole thing was, I'm never going to work more than 30 hours a week. He says, I don't want to do anything more than 30 hours a week.
Yeah.
And he goes, and I made a deal with myself that if I have to work more than 30 hours a week, I'll go back to being a full-time meditator. But I'm going to see what happens at 30 hours a week. He built a recording artist, public speaker, author, publishing company, all on never working. He says, I don't get up most days till 11. I don't ever go into work on Mondays. He says, I'm so lazy. I'm like, you can call me the Z-type personality.
Yeah.
And he says, yet everything gets done.
It's the Taoist law of effort, right?
Yeah.
Effortless effort.
Yeah.
Nothing gets done. No effort is expended, but everything gets done.
Yes. Yeah.
And I really believe that a business that's set up in opposition to an entrepreneur's core needs will never reach its full potential.
Say that again. A business that's set up in opposition, to entrepreneurs' core needs. So when you say core needs, what are you saying by that?
So we all have certain core needs, right? We have a need to be nurtured. We have a need for autonomy. We have a need for connection and belonging. We have a need to feel special and unique. We have a need to feel approved of, right? We have a need for control. We have a need for safety and security. And so these core needs have to be met by the business. And this is where the art of designing a business and architecting a business correctly comes in, because most businesses are designed in opposition to the founder's needs. They're meeting some needs, like they're meeting the need for control, but they're not meeting the need for autonomy and freedom. Or they're meeting the need for validation and approval, but they're not meeting some other need. And so usually when the business is set up in opposition to an entrepreneur's core needs, the entrepreneur subconsciously starts sabotaging the business. So if a person is really burnt out and they're working as hard as they can, that business is never going to reach its full potential, because it can't succeed any more than it's already succeeding, because the entrepreneur is already maxed out. They have no more to give. And if the business doubled in size, they would fall apart. So there's all these covert ways in which entrepreneurs hold their businesses back. And one of the core misalignments is that they value the business more than they value themselves. And for the business to grow to its full potential, they have to value themselves more than they value anything else. They have to put themselves first. Business is actually just a vehicle for a human being to self-actualize and to come into right relationship with themselves. And we see people who build very big, successful businesses, but they're doing it from the wrong place, and they're never able to actually enjoy their success. They're never able to enjoy what they worked so hard for.
Yeah, so this makes me think of, two things. But one is, the culture always follows the CEO, right?
Right.
The person running the business. And you can see that clearly. You change a major CEO of a major corporation, you see how quickly that culture changes. Apple, for example. But the other one, what do you think of these people? We kind of covered this, but it's interesting to me, these people, they do it from a positive frame, so we didn't quite cover it, like the state pumpers of the world. Jump up and down, yell and scream, drink 5 energy drinks, and then they feel great, so they accomplish a lot because they got their energy up. But then there's also the downs, the coming down side, right? Yeah, the contraction. Yeah. Versus people, and I sometimes think they think that's the method to grow, right? Yeah. But there's a whole nother group of people that learn to get bigger without state pumping. Can you talk about that from your perspective?
Yeah, so those cycles of expansion and contraction are energetically very expensive. So if I have to rely on, the rah-rah motivation to get myself hyped up every day, that, energetically takes a lot. And of course, like you astutely pointed out, the expansion is followed by a contraction. That's just the law of the universe. What I think is way more sustainable is establishing a baseline state that's sustainable, that's effortless, that's maintainable over a very long period of time. Because it's actually maximum maintainability that's a bigger factor in success than maximum intensity that one can manage occasionally. Most people focus on intensity, but it's actually the slow, boring, consistent actions done over a very long period of time.
The tortoise.
Exactly, the tortoise. Yeah. But also in business, the biggest gains stack in the long tail, right? So
compounding interest.
Exactly. Yeah. So the next 10 years from now, you're going to make 90% of the money that you've generated ever. Right? Because 10 years from now, and I'm just picking an arbitrary, number, time frame that's far enough into the future, you're going to be exponentially more savvy about a whole bunch of stuff. You'll have a bigger audience. You'll have a bigger community of people who know you, like you, trust you, and so on. And so your ability to exchange your energy for, value is going to be exponentially higher. And yet, most of the efforts in business are focused on today, this week, this month. Right? Because people are still operating from a shorter time horizon. And that's why they're trying to rev themselves up with caffeine, Monster, this, that. And then at night, they have to crash themselves with glasses of wine or sedatives or whatever. And this has become normalized, right? Every day is a neurochemical cocktail of, reaching some sort of peak state. And then now I can't, to be able to sleep, I have to bring myself all the way down. And then next day I do it all over again. That's very damaging for the body, but it's also very damaging for the psycho-emotional system that's intermediating all of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a lot. And it is damaging. I went through it. I did I did a lot of energy drinks till I had basically gotten blood in my urine at one point and blood in my throat. Had to take a year off. I thought I was dying. It was a real rough year learning to operate without all that stuff in my system and detoxing. Lots of detoxing that year. But what I noticed was when I took that year off, I spent the whole year doing lots of meditation, releasing and movement, cleaning up my mind, cleaning up the embodiment. And the next year, everything took off without that effort. Without the efforting, it all just started to skyrocket. Everything I ever wanted started to almost like magnetically pull to me. And that began the whole idea of like, I got to completely look at everything differently the way I've done it in the past. Did you have an experience like that?
100%. So for a long time, I didn't know how to be effective or productive without a lot of caffeine. And, I started drinking coffee since I was when I was 11 years old or something, and love coffee.
I still love coffee.
It tastes so good.
It's in my genetics. It says my genetics say more likely to want to drink coffee.
Are you serious?
It does.
That's awesome.
It says that.
And, I was a caffeine addict, and I'd need a cup of coffee in the morning and one in the afternoon, and I'd still get crashes. I had wired to associate being alert from a nervous system perspective, being sympathetically aroused, with feeling productive and feeling, able
that's
to.
the bulk of the planet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what this actually came down to, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this, I was judging that state of feeling a little groggy and a little lethargic in the morning as not good enough. And I was using caffeine to change my state, to change myself. And again, everything comes down to the absence of love. What shifted for me was when I asked myself, can you love yourself no matter how you feel? All the different states that I had deemed not good enough, that I didn't like, that needed to be changed by, pumping my system full of coffee or an energy drink or whatever, or even food, because food's the number one addiction in the world. I spent years just allowing myself to be still with that state that previously felt undesirable and sitting in it until all the charge of wanting to change it went away. And when I learned to enjoy the stillness, and when I learned to be okay with however I felt, that's when my productivity went through the roof. And I kind of needed this level of productivity. I hate the word productivity, by the way, because, you know, the whole culture around productivity is how to do more, how to do more, how to do more. That is basically cancer for entrepreneurs, because you can always do more. There's never enough time to do all the stuff. Exponential growth comes from not worshiping at the altar of doing more, but subtracting as much as possible and doing the least amount of stuff to produce the biggest possible returns.
Yeah, Matt and I were talking about that. Matt Hirsch and I.
Yeah.
I think you probably had something to do with that,
Yeah.
with him. Because he was saying, instead of scaling bigger, he scaled back.
Yeah.
And it was the best decision he ever made.
When we add things, that produces linear growth. To produce exponential growth, we have to subtract things. It's always a subtraction that produces the biggest gains. So in what we're talking about right now, subtracting coffee and extreme amounts of caffeine produced an exponentially higher ROI for me, because the quality of my thinking was better. I had less peaks and crashes. I didn't need a nap in the middle of the day anymore. My energy was more stable. My output was better, and I slept better, which meant I woke up the next day feeling better. So subtracting something is usually the most powerful intervention. And we see this with, you know, most disease, right? Let's subtract the shitty food that someone's eating. You know, if someone's really unhealthy, the first things we typically do is, okay, let's take the cigarettes, the alcohol, the bad stuff out of the equation. Because again, subtraction is the most powerful mathematical function we have access to.
And it really allows for a lot of growth. That's an interesting statement, because it's the same thing. Like, I had my big house with the gorgeous furniture. It looked perfect. And then when I sold it, I resisted. And then I sold all the furniture, resisted, because I loved it all. And now I have 2 bags and I'm nomadic, and I'm loving it. And I'm having so much fun. And I've seen this with so many things. Yeah, less is more. We love our complexity. And Elon Musk is doing this too. I think hopefully this helps him to get happier. But
With himself, or with
I think he got rid of like most of his stuff and just went down to like living real simple. I don't know exactly to what extreme, but and then you look at like Mark Zuckerberg. What if he had the same T-shirt and pants that he wore every day, so he didn't have to think. He focused on one goal at a time. Yeah. You know, one goal, get Facebook to 100 million subscribers. And he just stared at it every day, and that was it. It's a beautiful thing to think about and to ponder. Less is more. And
it makes things much easier, right? Because now when we don't have all of these options and choices, decision points to deal with, you know, one of the ways to reduce entropy is just to minimize decision making. I personally, minimize decision making in some areas of my life so I can maximize decision making in others. Like I love finding a new restaurant, and I'm more than happy to be extremely inefficient trying to find the best restaurant when I'm
That's
traveling.
your adventure time, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't want to optimize, every part of my life, but I like a ruthless level of efficiency with certain parts of my life, because to me, that's the art form. Like for me, the art form is, okay, I have a CEO in front of me who's got a $10 million business. How do we get this business to be doing 30 million a year with double the profit, and the CEO working only half as much as they currently work?
Nice. I like it.
To me, that is where mathematical elegance can be discovered, because that's a system, and every system is designed for the exact outputs that it's producing. And that's true for business, it's true for a marriage, it's true for, our bodies. And so if we want a different output, how do we need to re-architect the system? And my brain loves, that solving that kind of problem. But the cool thing that I like doing is we also take the founder's mind, the founder's psychological system, as another system, because that system is responsible for the business operating the way it is. So who does the founder need to be? What are the programs that need to be subtracted from their system? What are the things and biases and beliefs and patterns and ways of being and ways of thinking are suboptimal for this goal that we're trying to achieve? Who do they need to be and how do they need to feel? And from that, we derive the business. And from that,
I love that. I always look at how high on the emotional scale somebody I'm working is in the particular area. Because sometimes they're really high generally, and then they think about dating and they go, boom, they crash. So I love to look at like Lester Levinson's or Hawkins scale. And it sounds like you're doing something similar there. But you're doing it specifically with high-level entrepreneurs, which is very fascinating.
And I think the Hawkins scale can be applied to businesses as well. I think businesses have a consciousness. And
oh, yeah. So you mean the business in general, not just the CEO.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It operates at every level because it's a fractal.
You got me excited because that's the idea of this business is I'm trying to make sure everybody has access to courage and above that comes into the business. Yeah. And that's why it took a little while with Haas here. I was like, is Haas operating at courage or above? And as this, I was like, let's see how he acts.
And I think this is
Haas is behind the camera, by the way, guys.
He's the magician behind the scenes.
I love Haas. So
what you're touching on is so supremely important because this is the kind of world that I'm trying to create, where businesses are amplifying those states and those frequencies that we want to see more of in the world. And I think business is the fastest, most powerful way to influence the world, to transform the world, and to shift the world. Your business is a beacon for that frequency of courage and above. And businesses have a frequency as well. And businesses inherit their frequency from the founders, from the team, from the people involved in creating it, the culture, the nervous system of the founder. All of these things, combine to create a certain frequency, and customers and clients feel that frequency. And I think that impacts purchase and success and retention and churn and all the traditional business metrics way more than people realize. And when someone is able to build a high frequency business, that business is actually aligned with the universe, because the universe is designed to expand, and the universe is designed to evolve, and the universe is designed to raise its total system frequency over time. And so the easiest way to make sure that a business is going to be successful is to align the business with the natural vectors of the universe. And if the business is designed for contribution and impact, the business is operating at a frequency that people want to interact with it. If a business is designed to allow people to transform and grow and evolve and expand, then that business will thrive, because that is a fact. It is a law of the universe.
Yeah, I believe that 100%. And that's why it sounds like the whole thing is to get as many people above the level of courage as possible.
Exactly.
And then we'll all automatically amplify. It'll reach probably a tipping point.
Right.
When we get enough people, and everything will just start rolling. And people that don't normally want to raise are just going to start raising.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah.
There were several things I want to do. One is I want to do a little round table with some clients,
Nice.
but not clients, with some other like Matt Hirsch and different people like that, where we throw topics in and we all talk about topics together. So maybe sitting at this big table or something. It'd be a lot of fun. I'd love to have you back for another discussion.
Let's do it.
Go a little deeper with some things, get some specifics in. I'm really thinking, the way I'm thinking about this podcast is there's certain people I want to have over and over because they raise the vibration, they raise the frequency. And that's the whole point of the podcast, is to constantly raise that vibration. Yeah. It's not as much about viral as it is about drawing in the people that really want this information, the right people that are ready and want to be part of that growth phase.
Yeah.
And so I want to thank you for that. So what is your definition of, in your mind, and go anywhere you want with this, of success? What is your definition of success for anybody out there listening that's thinking about, I want a better life? What would you say?
May sound overly simplistic, but to me, success is just feeling good about oneself, feeling good about being here in this moment. I think everything we do is to, in a roundabout way, to get to that place. Like, oh, when I have $10 million in the bank, then I'll finally feel good with myself and feel at peace in this present moment. You know, I think it took me giving away all my money to sever that warped relationship that I had with money, to realize that actually the success is not a destination to get to, but it's a come from in each moment. And when I stopped orientating towards it in that way, where one day I will eventually be successful if I, run myself into the ground and do all this stuff, but it's a feeling that I get to have in each moment, in every moment. It's this space that I share with myself with this moment of now. And it's the state of being in love with myself, with everything in my universe. Then success stops being this thing out there in the distant future. And it just becomes an ongoing celebration of life itself.
It's a beautiful answer. It's I think it's right on point. And then we didn't cover that whole giving away all your money. I remember you said that before, and I find myself wondering, was it a large sum of cash? Did it hit you hard?
It was 95% of my net worth.
Yeah. Did it hit you hard when you did it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The idea was for it to hit me hard.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to bring up all my all the insecurity, all the ways I'd outsourced my safety to money.
Guts.
And so, in those years, I'd find people online, people from forums who'd lost their jobs, lost their marriages, their kids, like people going through hard stuff, and I'd work with them, and then I'd send them money. They were so bamboozled, but it was awesome. And I remember the moment where I had, I gave myself, like I said, I'd give myself like a 3-month runway. But that was it. Enough money to cover expenses for 3 months. I remember feeling so fucking free when I realized that my experience was no longer connected to a number in a bank account. That's actually one of the reasons why since then I've lived life through the experience of trusting life, trusting God, trusting the universe. Like, I'm forever trust falling into the arms of life itself. Posture of surrender allows me to operate with the least amount of entropy and the least amount of tension and the least amount of energy being expended, because I don't have to figure anything out.
But you're not talking about blind faith.
No.
You're talking about actual.
Yeah, it's a visceral feeling of like.
Yeah. There are people, and it's the whole, a lot of people talk about blind faith, but the faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, blind faith is sort of almost a disembodied, abdication.
Yeah.
Rather than a willing surrender into something greater.
Into God's arms.
Into God's arms.
Yeah. Have you ever read God Works Through Faith?
No.
It's an old book from the 50s, I believe. Is it Robert Russell? I love the book, so I should know the author. I've read it many times. It's a very short read. Most of the PDF versions are missing one of the chapters, I've noticed. There's only 3 chapters to it, but there's one of them missing. And that's a book you read. It's a treatment to teach you what faith feels like. It actually causes, if you're present, it causes you to feel this heating and warming sense of faith building in your body as you read it. And so I used to just read it and sit with it and read it and sit with it. It was such a neat book. And
look this one up.
Bob Proctor had a copy of it, and he studied it and studied it and studied it for years. And then he met this guy at a talk that was broke and struggling, and he had a stack of books in his trunk, and that was one of his books. Yeah. So he gave it to this kid. He said, "Here, you take this. You need it more than I do." Yeah. And Bob Proctor told David Nagel about this book, which was one of his students. And then David Nagel said, "Oh, I want a copy of that." And he said, "Well, good luck. It's out of print. And when you find one online, you should grab it because they go fast. And they're usually about $2,000, the originals." So he was looking for it and looking for it. He said for a long time, he says, "And one time I got this hit, it's online, go now." And I looked, and there it was. And it was about $2,000. He says, I was like, so I whipped out my credit card, bought it. It got sent to me in the mail. I was so excited to finally read this book Bob had been telling me about. I opened it up, and it had all of Bob's tick marks and underlines in it. It was the book he gave away from the trunk to that guy years earlier. And he says, "I bought Bob's book." Wow. And he said that was amazing. The universe works in crazy ways. Or God, I don't even like saying the universe anymore, but you get the idea. And so powerful when you think about it.
That serendipity is how the universe communicates.
Yeah.
So we live in a sovereign universe where for us to be sovereign, there can be no interference in our will. Mm-hmm. And so the only way that the universe can confirm alignment is through serendipity. And so to me, serendipity is sort of how God speaks to us and tells us that we're on the right track.
Yes, beautifully said. And by the way, there is somebody now, for anybody that's wondering, that's reprinting that book on Amazon, the full copy. It's on Amazon now. It has a blue cover with a cross on it. So if you're looking, not that don't get the PDF. It'll probably be missing a chapter. Awesome. It was awesome having you here. We'll definitely have you back.
Such a pleasure.
And excuse me. Yeah, we'll definitely have you back. And is there anything you want to say to everybody in parting before we meet again on the podcast, that is?
Yeah, one of the recent little tweaks that I made has really made a profound difference. So I'll share that.
Please.
Which is I decided to optimize my whole life around joy, around maximizing joy. So I see everything as a mathematical equation. So life, business, relationships, these are all systems that, can be derived into an equation. Every equation is basically organized around certain variables. The variable we pick determines the equation, which determines the experience we have. So if I optimize a business for profit, it'll yield a certain kind of business.
Yes.
If I optimize a business for freedom and flexibility and fun, that'll yield a different business. So I decided to examine all the equations at play in my life and my business and everywhere, and optimize everything around one variable, which is joy, just as an experiment. And it has absolutely, completely changed every aspect of my life. So I just want to share that in case anyone wants to give that a try.
I love it.
And just look at everything through that decision filter and say, okay, what would this look like if I was maximizing joy? What would I do here if I was maximizing joy? What would it look like for me to maximize joy here?
Yeah, it makes me think of the time I had no joy and I was working all the time, and I decided I needed joy. So I didn't maximize around joy. Yeah. I made time for a little bit of joy each day at that time in my life. But this is much better. So.
Yeah, I think particularly as entrepreneurs, but as any human being, we owe it to ourselves to maximize our return on life.
Well, you're controlling the law of attraction. You're not controlling it, but you're channeling the law of attraction. What you focus on expands.
Right.
Most people think they're focused on the right thing, but they're focused on the wrong thing.
We're focused on the thing that'll hopefully lead to the thing, which leads to the thing which finally leads to the thing we actually want. Yeah. What if we just go direct to the source?
Yeah, and you got to really ask yourself, is this what I want? You got to ask the right question. So that would be an interesting discussion. What's the right question? We go deep into that for a while.
Maybe we start the next one there.
Yeah. What's the right question? Okay. Well, it was a pleasure having you on the podcast. So for everybody out there, hopefully enjoyed this podcast. I want to invite you, if you're on YouTube or Rumble or someplace like that, where you can comment, to put a comment in the podcast. I'm going to definitely check those out, especially when it first comes out. I'll be looking at those a lot. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, what you want more of. I love to help each other to grow. So anything in there that helps us to grow as a channel, to help somebody else in the channel to grow, is really appreciated. And if Ani's around, maybe he'll check out some of he's more than welcome to come check out and respond to the comments. Who knows? I think that's it. So with that said, thank you for being here. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.